I had some big gaps in my education. The first time I actually set foot in a formal classroom setting is when I stepped into the Tory Turtle at the University of Alberta. And I was really struggling in the first year. I was going to flunk out. And I was also working night shift at a lumber mill around that point in time. And I said to myself, I got to get a job that doesn't involve me working all night so I can get some, homework done here. And it just so happened that Chandos had an ad in the Engineering Student Society. I had a phone call from a lady named Michelle Mellick. I went into the office. That was the first time I had ever set foot in an office building. But Chandos saw something in me. I don't know what it was. I certainly didn't have the best grades. And they gave me the job.
Hey everyone, welcome to Nailed It, a podcast powered by Parker Huggett.
A big warm introduction to Tim Coldwell from Chandos. He is the president of a Canadian employee-owned general contractor. Tim's professional blueprint is quite impressive, progressing through the ranks from PC, PM to 22 years later with the firm being the president of this employee-owned general contractor. He is a proud Mohawk entrepreneur and also achieved Canada's top 40 under 40. Welcome, Tim.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, super excited. It's our 10th episode. And, I've had the pleasure of working with Chandos Construction for the last 18 years. And you guys have experienced tremendous growth and turned a lot of heads as someone who speaks to the industry across Canada. We're really excited to have you here. Outside of my warm, high-level introduction, please share with us who you are, your position, tenure in the industry, and a bit about Chandos.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Tim Coldwell. I'm the president of Chandos Construction. Chandos is a purpose-driven national technical builder that's leading change in the Canadian construction industry. I serve as the president of Chandos. Now, the cool thing about our organization is that we're 100% employee-owned. A single class of voting shares, and less than 30% of the equity of the company is concentrated with executives. So I run around with the president's title, but I really work for the people that are doing the work. And I think that's one of the defining features of this organization.
Amazing. And I also think your story's pretty interesting, if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Sure. Yeah, where to start with that? So, without getting too far into the details, so I grew up in what would be loosely described as a very conservative kind of religious community. And at, 15, 16 years old, I said to myself, this is just not right. And I got to follow my own path here. And so I was out, and I literally was going to be on the street in a cardboard box if I didn't figure it out. At that time, I learned about my Mohawk ancestry. So I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I did not grow up in the community, so I'm not speaking from a place of kind of lived Indigenous experience. But I did learn that the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte would support education for me if I had decent grades in high school. So I did high school through distance learning. I got the grades that we were looking for, and I got into the University of Alberta on a full scholarship from the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. And I had some big gaps in my education. I was homeschooled. The first time I actually set foot in a formal classroom setting is when I stepped into the Tory Turtle at the University of Alberta. Well, that was an experience to say the least. And so I had some big gaps, and I was really struggling in the first year. I was going to flunk out, and I was also working night shift at a lumber mill around that point in time. And I said to myself, I got to get a job that doesn't involve me working all night so I can get some, homework done here. And it just so happened that Chandos had an ad in the Engineering Student Society daytimer journal thing that they give you on orientation day. So I'm flipping through, and I just fired over a resume. And a couple days later, I had a phone call from a lady named Michelle Mellick. I went into the office. That was the first time I had ever set foot in an office building, and I had an awkward interview, to say the least. But Chandos saw something in me. I don't know what it was. I certainly didn't have the best grades. I did have some experience, building churches and houses and barns and those sorts of things. And they gave me the job. And, Chandos really became a second family for me. And that strong kind of emotional connection to the company has driven me over the years. And there's kind of a cool bow to connect the story here. And so 24 years later, we're actually building a project in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory on land with the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, my home community, but it's for the First Nations Technical Institute. So I think it's really cool to be able to build a building for the folks that changed my life by giving me a scholarship. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for that. And I certainly wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for Chandos taking a chance on me.
That's amazing. That gives me goosebumps too. I love the full circle and the memory of the impact that a company made to you, right? And for you. And, I think there's a lot of businesses out there and employees that forget about the opportunities that are given. And it's easy to lose sight of because we get caught up in the hamster wheel. But I always loved how purpose-driven you are. And that's probably why you've been so successful, is because you have a passion for what can be versus the status quo.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of sayings that I love. The construction business is a tough business. Like, there are skinny margins. There's all sorts of nonsense that goes on in this business. And people sometimes say to me, like, why are you so happy? There's a few things. The mindset's a big part of it. One of the sayings that I love is he who has a why can endure any how. And so, it's this idea of a bigger picture. Like, why are we working so hard in this industry? Why am I doing that personally? Why is that expected in the construction industry in many instances? Like, what does that all ladder up to? And so I've always had a very clear picture for the kind of leader I want to be in my life. And then as I've taken on more leadership opportunities with Chandos, I've had a very clear picture for the kind of organization that we're building. And so, yes, there's challenges, but when I get out of bed every day and put my feet on the floor, I see forward movement towards the vision that I have for myself, as well as the vision for Chandos as an organization. And that gives me joy. So I think that idea of having a vision for where you want to go is a simple concept, but very few people actually understand that and have a clear vision for themselves.
Yeah, clarity is super important to be successful. So kind of getting into the theme of the show, Nailed It. Do you have an experience, share, where you've really had a success, whether that's through a hire, a personal situation that's led to a professional positive outcome outside of what you've shared in your great story, that's really led to an experience here that's really led to a success?
Yeah, let me just think about this for a second. I would say many folks in Canada will know our organization as leaders in this delivery method called integrated project delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're proud of that. And I think we've done some good work there. The ultimate measure for me is to see our competitors and others in the industry also embracing it. It's one thing to do it on your own. It's another thing for the whole industry to do it. Now, having said that, it's not like we invented it. Part of my story is I've never really worked anywhere other than Chandos. So what do I know about building $1 billion construction company? One of the things that I started to cultivate about 10, 15 years into my career, Chandos, was going and hanging out with contractors that were much larger than us and who weren't competing with us. And for a while, for about 7 years, I was running our Costco wholesale national account. We built a lot of those projects across the country. And so I got connected to American general contractors, and they're not competing with us. And, long winding story, got connected to the guys at DPR Construction in the Bay Area, and a very cool organization, a young organization. They were founded in 1990. I think they're doing $10 billion with 10,000 employees these days. So you want to talk about something that's different than the typical stodgy contractor that's been around for like 100 years, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I heard about the guys at DPR, and I heard about this IPD thing that was going on. And I'm a bit of a relentless character, so I picked up the phone and I called Doug Woods at DPR, who's the CEO. He's passed away now. And I said, "Hey, Doug, it's Tim from Chandos calling from Alberta." He's like, "Who?" And he's like kind of like a surfer dude from California, right? I'm like, "It's Tim. I'm a contractor from Alberta. Where's that?" I'm like, "Doug, it's in Canada." Anyways, we had this conversation, and I said, "I'd love to bring a group of folks down, and I'd love to talk to you about culture, employee ownership, and this integrated project delivery stuff that I hear you guys are doing." And so Tom Rettle, our board chair, and I went down there. And we had a great conversation with those guys and gals at DPR. They completely kind of welcomed us into their circle. They introduced us to all sorts of folks in the US. And we sucked up that knowledge and information and that mentorship that they offered us. And we brought that into our business. And I think if it weren't for that experience, I don't know where we would be as an organization these days. Much of our expansion from a regional contractor to a national contractor has been fueled by our leadership on integrated project delivery. And I think it's made that geographic expansion much easier for us. And we've been very vocal about this in terms of thanking our friends at DPR for, putting their arm around our shoulder and mentoring us as an organization. They're just great folks.
That's amazing that you had the foresight to look into a project or economic time machine, essentially, because the maturization of the U.S. is, they're more mature than us as an industry for sure. And what you've done in Vancouver, the greater Vancouver area and the greater Toronto area in such a short period of time in comparison to those that have come before you, outside looking in, has been unheard of.
Yeah, I can share a little bit on that. So my theory of innovation in the construction industry, now this is Tim Coldwell's theory, so I don't know how far you want to take it.
But, I'm excited.
My theory is the Bay Area of San Francisco is about 10 years in front of the construction industry in Canada. And when I say 10 years in front, it's generally Alberta and Ontario. And if it's sustainability, it's British Columbia. But those provinces, about 10 years in front. And frankly, I have a theory that Western Europe is about 10 years in front of the Bay Area of San Francisco. Now, I think folks in the Bay Area would be upset about me saying this, but that's okay. That's my theory of innovation in the construction industry. But yeah, just back to, let's call it the pivot out of Alberta. Chandos was founded in 1980. In Edmonton. We're named for Lake Chandos outside of Peterborough, Ontario. There's a whole other story there for maybe a different day. And, we were in Alberta and one day we said, you know what, we have too many eggs in the Alberta basket. It was like 300 or 400 million of revenue at the time. That's a lot of activity just in one economic region. And we should use this integrated project delivery stuff that we're doing as a way to diversify. And so that turned into us going to British Columbia and Ontario at the same time. We actually didn't intend to go in both directions at once. The original plan was to go to Vancouver first, and then a couple years later go to Ontario. But demand for integrated project delivery was off the charts, and there was an opportunity there. So that's what we did. Now, I haven't talked widely about why we did it, but we saw a softening in the Alberta economy, particularly as a result of the energy sector. Chandos as an organization has never really done projects that rely on the energy sector. So no pipelines, no heavy industrial. The closest that we would get to that would be like a pipeline control center or something like that. But we saw that softening. And we also saw good margins in Ontario and Vancouver. And we said, well, we don't want to preside over laying off a significant portion of Chandos's staff. We're an opportunity organization, and so let's expand and let's provide opportunity to the unit holders of this company. So that was the idea. And one of the things that we're most proud of is we went from 95% of our backlog and our revenue and our margin coming out of Alberta. And 5 years later, 60% of backlog revenue and margin was from outside of Alberta. And over a 6 or 7 year period, we averaged 15% year-on-year growth and doubled the enterprise value of the organization through that whole adventure. So really proud of that. I would also say that as we grew and as we did that, there was fundamentally this idea of let's build out this national platform that we can then scale further on. Growing at 15% a year is stressful for an organization. And so that's been a bit of a wild ride. But now at a base of, call it 700 million and change, we're actually pulling back our growth objectives into the 5 to 8% organic growth range per year. And we think that that's sort of a long-term average for growth is where we want to be as an organization. And it's funny, at that kind of a base number of 700 million and change, like that adds up real quick. And I think that's the sweet spot for the organization going forward.
Yeah. And the other piece I'd love to highlight is when you went into those different markets, whether it was Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, you also were able to attract franchise players in those markets because of how you were doing business, and are now delivering through the joint venture model and collaborative model in Chalk River, one of the largest IPD projects in Canada. That's got to be a huge win coming into a tight market like Ottawa and the nation's capital.
Yeah, for sure. Once again, that connects back to our whole IPD adventure. Chandos has had no experience with nuclear projects prior to that, but we were seen as, and I guess are seen as, the leaders in integrated project delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And so that client wanted to use that delivery method for a whole host of reasons. And we teamed up with our friends at Bird Construction to do a joint venture. Gilles Royer over there is the consummate professional. I do a handshake deal with him any day. And yeah, it's been a great project. We're through validation, we're on site, foundations are poured, the project's going well, and it is the largest IPD project in Canada.
That's incredible. And so what do you view as, the biggest, what do you think the general contracting and development industry in Canada does really well?
I think that's a tougher question, man. There's some challenges there. Let me think of something positive here for a second. I think that the construction development industry does a really good job of what I would call corporate social responsibility, meaning stroke a check to the Children's Hospital, to the local charity, to the United Way, and support community causes through financial gifts. I think that is something that the real estate and construction industry does really well at. I also think that there's a whole new frontier where developers and contractors and designers, in addition to doing what we've always done by signing big checks, we can also have a positive impact on Canadian society through the actual business model that our organizations utilize. And so I think that's the frontier. That's what makes me really excited. There's huge opportunity there.
And that, Chandos being a B Corp, you guys are fully living and breathing that, right?
Yeah. And just to unpack a few pieces of that. So let me just unpack B Corp for a minute. So back in 2014, 2015, like 90% of the people walking this earth had no idea what a B Corp was.
Yeah.
And so I logged onto their website. They had an online tool that you could go through and kind of give yourself an assessment. And I'm like, holy crap. Like, we actually qualify as a B Corp without actually changing anything that we actually do. And so we sent in the paperwork. And we became B Corp certified in 2015. We actually didn't tell our customers, and we didn't have a big fanfare thing with our staff. That was more of an authenticity thing for us. And the beauty of that whole rating system is that a third party will look at what you're doing and basically say, yeah, you know what? They're not making it up. They're actually doing what they said they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's cool. Now, in terms of the kind of impact that contractors can have, I think that we are uniquely positioned as contractors to have a huge impact in Canadian society. So a few things. 30 to 40% of the GHG footprint in this country comes from the built environment. Mm. So that's a great impact that we can have. 30% of the garbage in Canadian landfills comes from construction sites. That's a great impact that we can have. And I think the construction industry is the last escalator to the middle class, or one of the last great escalators to the middle class. So we need hundreds and hundreds and thousands of skilled workers in this country. I think lots of the listeners will know RBC has suggested that 700,000 of the 1.5 million workers in the Canadian construction industry are going to retire by 2028. That's like in 5 years, right? And then demand for construction activities is expected to double. RBC said $2 trillion to do the clean energy transition. CMHC said $1 trillion to fix housing affordability. And it's roughly $1 trillion more on top of that to address the infrastructure deficit and to not get into kind of a infrastructure deficit in the future. So call it rough numbers, $4 trillion with a T, incremental demand for construction services between now and 2050. You can model that out, but it suggests that the workforce in Canada needs to double, if not triple, from a construction standpoint. And then related to all of that, the productivity in the construction industry has been decreasing at about 2% a year on average since the 70s, and it still continues to do that. So we as an industry have this labor crisis and this productivity crisis that we need to address. And if we can't figure that out, there's not going to be affordable housing in this country. And so I think there's going to be a lot more attention placed on the construction industry. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to lead. Just as an example, back to kind of the impact stuff that I mentioned, since the early 2000s, Chandos has diverted over 80% of our entire enterprise waste stream. Costs us a little bit, like tiny dollars, but we win a bunch of work because of our reputation for doing that. And what if every major contractor did construction waste diversion and upcycling? What impact would that have in Canada? The big frontier on the climate adventure is embodied carbon for contractors. So there's a bunch of contractors who run around and pat themselves in the back because they're building a net zero building. Like, who cares? That's the owner's decision to build a net zero building. But reducing the embodied carbon of that building that you're building by, say, 30 or 40% is something that contractors can control. And you can do that without changing the design. It's just all about supply chain and finding better, lower carbon sources for these materials. So we're very interested in that. And then back to the idea of impact, I've been a huge proponent of social procurement. So my story is really a story of social procurement. I'm a walking example of what happens when you give somebody a chance. And so what happens when general contractors with our big supply chains hire at-risk youth and put them to work with apprenticeships? What happens when we hire small and medium subcontractors that are owned by new Canadians or refugees and give them a painting contract or a T-bar ceiling contract? What happens to Canadian society when we do that? What happens when we make the work sites and the job sites more welcoming for women, for LGBTQ folks? I think all of those things are things that contractors can make a meaningful impact on, right?
That's exciting and certainly gives me a hope for a brighter future, knowing that you guys are thinking that way. And so last question I always like to get into, in your opinion, why should youth strongly consider a career in construction development industry?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that this industry is going to be one of the coolest, most transformative industries that's going on out there for a while. So a few things. So I mentioned all the opportunities for impact a few moments ago. The income opportunities right now are amazing, right? So carpenters will make about $50 an hour straight time downtown Toronto, in that labor board region. And that's roughly double what the average university degree, that's roughly double what the average person with an undergraduate degree earns. So, earn twice as much money with no student debt in an industry that is deeply impactful. The really exciting thing about Canada is I also think Canada is in this kind of nation building stage. I've done a bit of work with Senator Omovar on social procurement, among other things. And she's one of the original thought leaders around the Century Initiative, which is this initiative in Canada that has done a demographic analysis that suggests that this country needs a population of 100 million people by the year 2100. And if we can't get to that kind of a population, there's not enough people with jobs and paying taxes to pay for an aging population. Japan has this challenge right now. Many other countries do as well. But think about that. There's 40 million people in this country, and we're talking about, doubling the size of the built environment within the next 80 years. Just that's huge, huge opportunity. And I think the thing that's really interesting that Senator Omovar and I chatted about is what if that population growth, which is the number one predictor of construction activity, by the way, which is why I'm talking about it, what if that population growth didn't just happen in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver? What if we filled in the blank parts of the map? And if we had policy around doing that? You drive around in the US and you can't drive more than an hour before you hit a city of 1 million people, particularly on the eastern seaboard. What if Thunder Bay was a city of 1 million people? Regina and Saskatoon, 1 million people, right? Sudbury. What if those sorts of cities started to look like that? I think we're going to see those sorts of things in my career and in the career of folks that are just joining the industry today.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to spend with us on this episode, Tim. And yeah, we look forward to hearing the listeners' review.
Cool. Thanks for having me.